Yo, yo, yo. Happy hump day, everyone. It is StatATL. Back by popular demand, I am going to record a first look video for week 7. We will do a kind of game by game breakdown, kind of giving my first thoughts. I generally like to open up the DK app, go position by position, game by game, just kind of giving my initial thoughts on each game and then on the slate in general. So, with that in mind, let's kind of hop in with the first game on the Sunday main slate, which is not the Rams and Jaguars. That is the Saints visiting the Bears. So, first game on the slate, I think, is a pretty interesting one here. New Orleans hasn't given up any massive games to opposing quarterbacks, but all 6 opposing quarterbacks they faced exceeded 16 fantasy points, while Mac Jones, Josh Allen, and Drake May all surpassed 23 points. So Caleb Williams initially intriguing here. And I think DeAndre Swift, who's a player I hardly ever roster, but he's seen 12 or more rush attempts and 3 or more targets in every game. And the Saints have faced 5 opposing running backs who saw that same output of at least 12 carries and 3 or more targets. James Conner, Christian McCaffrey, James Cook, Kenneth Walker, and Cam Scatterbo. And each of them had at least 14.4 fantasy points. So to me, that kind of makes DeAndre Swift initially appealing at 5,700, kind of discarding any of my biases towards him. Opposing pass catchers also have put up solid games each week against the Saints. Marvin Harrison, Juwan Jennings, JSN, Shakir, Kayshon Boutte, Theo Johnson, all topping 17.9 points. So I think Rome Odunze kind of stands out here as the most likely receiver to kind of continue that trend. I think Luther Burton also intriguing here. And then on the other side of the ball, both Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed are interesting as kind of like a correlated piece if you're going to build around the game. The potential concern for me around this game is that the former Saints head coach, now Chicago defensive coordinator, Dennis Allen, should know Spencer Rattler pretty well. So if he's able to kind of scheme a way for the Bears defense to shut down Rattler and the Saints offense, I feel like at 5,800, this may be a tougher spot for Caleb Williams to kind of give you a ceiling game, which is probably what you're going to need out of him with, obviously we'll get there with the Commanders and Cowboys game as the last game on the slate, which should be a back and forth high scoring affair. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on the Saints and the Bears. So next game we've got here is the Dolphins and Browns. So kind of after doing my very first kind of look through of all 10 games, I circled back to Dylan Gabriel here. And so why did I circle back to him is that he's priced all the way down to 4,400. He's the cheapest of any starting quarterback. And now he's facing a Dolphins team at home that allowed Daniel Jones and Drake May, Josh Allen, Justin Field, Justin Herbert, all the top 18.5 fantasy points this season. And, if you've kind of dove into the slate, like it feels pretty tight with pricing. So I feel like Gabriel is going to open up some things and he may have some value this week. So Dylan Gabriel, hasn't really been super exciting so far. He's yet to throw an interception this season. He does have 3 touchdowns through a little over 2 games. So I do think he does have some upside for that 15 to 20 points at 4,400 could be interesting there. Jerry Jeudy's coming off 13 targets last week. He's got the same salary as Gabriel at 4,400. And I think Harold Fannin is also super intriguing at 3,900. He's averaging 6 targets a week. He's seen 14 targets the past 2 games that Dylan Gabriel has started. And David Njoku left the game last week with an injury. He may not be able to go. So I could see this as a spot where a really strong game environment for Harold Fannin here. And it also feels like a strong bounce back spot for Quinshon Judkins, coming off his worst performance of the year. The opposing RB1 has exceeded 97 total yards in every game against Miami, with Kamani Vidal, Rico Dowdle, and Ramondre Stevenson all surpassing 137 total yards. So at 6K, like Judkins is interesting. On the Miami side of the ball, going to be avoiding Tua, going to be avoiding Devon A. Chan as well, because I've kind of got a rule where I don't play running backs until, against Cleveland until further notice. Still applies here after Jaylen Warren, who put up 8.3 points last week, was, kind of marked the fifth RB1 of the season, held to 15 or fewer points. The only running back who went for more than 15 points was Jahmyr Gibbs, who I think was 17.7. And obviously the Browns have faced Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs, Jordan Mason, Chase Brown, obviously Jahmyr Gibbs, Jalen Waddle last week. This is just not a spot where I'm going to target the Dolphins run game. I think the only Dolphin with I've got some initial interest is Jalen Waddle. His price is up to 6,300, so certainly not a slam dunk, but certainly one worth considering. So next game we've got on the slate here is the Raiders visiting the Chiefs. So the Chiefs are going to carry, a team total on par with Dallas and Washington, but it feels like really hard to imagine for me a game environment as robust as that game, with the Chiefs' really strong defense here at Arrowhead, taking on Geno Smith, who has looked absolutely broken the past few weeks. Patrick Mahomes coming off 3 straight great performances with 27 or more fantasy points in each of those games. So I think he'll likely still stay in consideration for me, kind of despite the game environment concerns. I don't know that I see the Chiefs throwing for 400 yards here if Las Vegas is just not doing anything on offense. The ground game for the Chiefs hasn't really been strong at all this season. And Vegas has yet to allow a running back to exceed 78 rushing yards or 86 total yards all year. So with that considered, I don't see this as a spot where Isaiah Pacheco makes my player pool. The most interesting play, though, in this game is going to be Rashee Rice at 5,600. It's Wednesday, but I'm expecting him to be uber chalk this week at that price. Rice operated as Mahomes' top target last year. He's making his season debut this week after serving a 6-game suspension, but the upside at his price, honestly, is just hard to ignore. And then if we cycle over to the Raiders side of the ball, Ashton Genty is appealing. He's seen 20 or more opportunities the past 3 weeks, but it's 7,000 on DraftKings. It just feels like an unlikely spot for him to post a had-to-have-it score. I think first pass, I think it's likely just Rashee Rice as a one-off for me in this game. So next game, we've got the Eagles visiting the Vikings. Vikings have held every quarterback they faced this season to 210 or less passing yards. And while that list doesn't feature any big-name quarterbacks, it feels unlikely to be a spot where Jalen Hurts outscores Dak Prescott and Jaden Daniels, who are both within $200 of his DK salary. So not really a spot I'm interested in. I am intrigued to see what the field does with Saquon Barkley this week, who's yet to top 20 fantasy points all season. He's still priced up at 7,700. But the Vikings have allowed big days to all 3 running backs that saw 20 or more touches. 168 total yards to Bijan Robinson, 128 to Quinshon Judkins, and 134 to Kenneth Gainwell. Gainwell also scored 2 touchdowns. So, after starting the season 4-0, where Barkley had 22 or more touches in all of those games, the Eagles have lost back-to-back games to the Giants and the Broncos, where Saquon failed to see 15 touches. So I've got to think they go back to leaning on Saquon here. And past history has kind of shown that the the Vikings defense can be susceptible to big games from running backs if they get a large opportunity share. So through the air, neither A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith stand out to me here. Vikings held Jamar Chase, Rome Odunze, Drake London, all to under 50 or fewer passing yards. So not really a spot I'm running to play Brown or Smith. Other side of the ball, though, for pass catchers does stand out, specifically for Justin Jefferson, who's posted back-to-back games with 120 or more yards. Now facing that Eagles secondary that's allowed CeeDee Lamb and Puka Nacua, Cortland Sutton, Emeka Ibuka, all to hit 100 receiving yards this season. And then, Wan'Dale Robinson also had a solid outing just last week with, 20-plus DK points on a 684 and one touchdown line. So I do think Jefferson is, he's priced up, but I do think he's quite intriguing as well. So next game we've got here, 1 p.m. slot is the Panthers at the Jets. A week after I highlighted how good a spot it was for Bryce Young last week for the Panthers, this is a spot I'm completely hopping off that train. The Jets defense has held Josh Allen and Baker Mayfield, Dak Prescott, Bo Nix, Aaron Rodgers, all under 250 yards this season. So not a spot I'm going to highlight Bryce Young. The matchup for Carolina does stand out, but Rico Dowdle has seen his price skyrocket all the way up to 6,800 after back-to-back monster games, and Chuba Hubbard is likely to return to the mix, so I would expect this to be somewhat of a split backfield. For the Jets, Garrett Wilson hyperextended his knee last week. He's likely to miss the next few weeks, including this game, so that really leaves the passing weapons for the Jets to be basically non-existent. Probably outside of rookie tight end Mason Taylor. So I don't expect the Jets to throw often. But at 3,400, Taylor's interesting. I do think the Jets will try to run the ball as much as possible, which makes Breece Hall intriguing, as 20-plus touches kind of feels like the likeliest scenario for him. But, I think just kind of on first pass, this doesn't feel like a game I'm going to have a lot of exposure to. And then the final game of the 1 p.m. window is the Patriots visiting the Titans. So, Drake May has looked really strong this season. He's top 21 or more fantasy points in 4 out of the past 5 weeks. Now he's facing a 1-5 Titans team. However, the Titans D has been better than I think the field's going to realize. They've held Nix, Stafford, Stroud, Kyler Murray, Geno Smith, Daniel Jones, all to less than 300 total yards against them, despite, again, being 1-5. So, the ground matchup doesn't really stand out for Ramondre Stevenson or TreVeyon Henderson either. Again, operating as a split backfield. As Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, Kyron Williams, Ashton Genty, Michael Carter, Woody Marks, they all combined to average less than 4 yards a carry against the Titans. So, again, not a spot that really stands out for me. What is interesting is so far this season, a Patriot pass catcher has posted, a tournament-worthy score 5 times already. Kind of hard to pin down who that's going to be on a given week. It's been Kayshon Boutte has put up a 5x salary score twice. Stephon Diggs did it once. Hunter Henry did it once. Demario Douglas posted a 4.9x salary score last week, which is basically a 5x score. And then, Stephon Diggs, who I'm not even factoring into this, had, a 4.2 multiplier score back in week 4. So almost every week, a New England pass catcher has put up a tournament viable score. So I could certainly, see all 4 of those guys, whether it's Boutte, Diggs, Hunter Henry, or Demario Douglas, in play this week as value pieces as tight, as salary is a little bit on the tighter side. On the Tennessee side, I feel like the pass catchers are sneakily intriguing to me. The Patriots have already allowed Jacoby Myers, Tyreek Hill, Chris Olave, Brock Bowers, and Dalton Kincaid to exceed 97 yards against them. And the Titans pass catchers are all under 5K. Calvin Ridley left the Raiders game with a hamstring injury last week. And if he were to miss Alec Ayomayar, Chimere Dike, Van Jefferson, tight end Jig Okonkwo, they'd probably all be some of my favorite inexpensive value pieces, basically all in the 3K range. So I think that's an intriguing way to get some exposure to this game, but not one that's really jumping out to me. Then if we move to the late slate, first game is the Giants visiting Denver Broncos. So Bo Nix hasn't been great this season, but he's seen his price drop down to 5,600. It's the cheapest he's been all season. And the Giants have surrendered 295 or more total yards to Jaden Daniels, Dak Prescott, and Jalen Hurts this season. So I do think Bo Nix is interesting. I'm not sure he's going to make my final pool, but I do think he's interesting. The other side of the ball, actually also interesting. Jackson Darts posted a fantasy score of 18.6 or higher in all three of his starts. He's only priced at 5,200. So while I do think the matchup's going to be one that the field is going to completely shy away from, I think it should be noted that Daniel Jones, Justin Herbert, and Jalen Hurts all posted games of 18 or more fantasy points against the Broncos. And again, Jackson Dart has done that in all three of his starts. So I do think he is worth considering this week, although it's certainly not the most likely spot for him to put up a huge game. I just feel like it's unlikely that Nix or Dart produces, a top raw point or even point per dollar score in this matchup. So, none of the Giants skill position players really stand out. I think the only Bronco I'd have interest in playing would be Cortland Sutton. He's got 4 games of 17.9 or higher fantasy points already this year. So I think if you wanted to get exposure to this game, Sutton would be my favorite piece there. Next game on the slate is the Colts visiting the Chargers. I think this matchup's probably better than it appears for Justin Herbert, as the Colts have allowed games of 375 and 320 passing yards the past 3 weeks. I guess, however, Justin Herbert only has 1 game over 20 fantasy points all season. So probably not an option where I'm running to play him, but I do think he's viable. On the ground, we did see Kamali Vidal snatch the lead back role last week. Doesn't really stand out in this matchup at 5,500, as no running back has topped 17 fantasy points against the Colts all season. I think through the air for the Chargers, my interest is probably going to depend on Quentin Johnston's status. He missed last week with a hamstring injury. If he's to miss again, I think both Ladd McConkey and Keenan Allen become more viable. And then you've got rookies Trey Harris and rookie tight end Oronde Gadsden. I think they'd be intriguing, dart throws. Gadsden had 8 targets last week. Trey Harris, I think, was second in snaps, was on the field for 70 or 80% of snaps last week. So I think those are both intriguing options down, super cheap, 32, 3,300. And then on the other side of the ball, matchups below average for Daniel Jones, but I think it's better than it would appear for Jonathan Taylor. Chargers allowed Devon Achane and JCM, a.k.a. Bill, to both go for 150 total yards and 2 touchdowns against them in the last 2 weeks. So I think at 8,800, he's he's the most expensive player on the slate, but he's exceeded 30 DK points in half his games. So I do think JT's interesting. Opposing wide receiver ones have fared better than the field is going to realize against the Rams, with Hollywood Brown, who went for 99 yards, Cortland Sutton, who went for 118 yards and a touchdown, Deebo Samuel went for 96 and a touchdown, Jalen Waddle went for 95 yards. All opposing wide receiver ones have posted solid lines against them. Malik Neighbors was obviously injured mid-game, so he's not an exciting click, but I think Michael Pittman is intriguing here. I think, as is Tyler Warren, onesie tight end position. Warren's leading the team in red zone targets. So I think if I was going to play a Colt, I think all 3 of them between Warren, Pittman, and JT are all interesting. Second to last game on the slate is the Packers visiting the Cardinals. Kyler Murray looks truly questionable to play even just here on Wednesday, meaning that we might get to see veteran Jacoby Brissett under center again for the Cardinals. He's priced down at 4,500. A somewhat intriguing bet on volume, as the Packers have seen at least 36 pass attempts against them in every game. And Brissett had 44 pass attempts last week against Indy. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him slinging the rock. But what this really did was lead to Trey McBride, tying a season high in targets. Yet another week where he's at double-digit targets. And early on, I think he's probably my favorite tight end option on the slate at 5,700. Running backs have really struggled against the Packers all year, so I would expect, the Cardinals to be leaning on the pass. And the offense really does flow through Trey McBride. So he's probably my favorite option on the Arizona side of the ball. On the other side of the ball, I feel like the Cardinals appear to be a tough matchup on paper for the quarterback position. However, their opponents this year are Spencer Rattler, Bryce Young, Mac Jones, Sam Darnold, Cam Ward, and Daniel Jones. So not exactly, a murderer's row of opponents at quarterback. So I think at 6,200, Jordan Love's interesting. The Packers should be able to score against the Cardinals. They've got an implied team total of 26 points. So, if they go over and go for 4 or 5 touchdowns instead of 3 or 4, I feel like this is a spot that's certainly interesting for Jordan Love. Matchup also stands out on the ground for Josh Jacobs. Opposing running backs have scored every week against Arizona, and Jacobs is coming off back-to-back 30-plus point fantasy performances, and he's got 20 or more touches in every game this season. So I feel like he's a safe bet for volume. And, he's priced up, but he's certainly one of my favorite pay-up options this week. And then through the air, I do like Matthew Golden and Tucker Kraft. Again, standing out as sub 5K options would probably be my favorite options if pairing with Jordan Love, but I think you can play them both as one-offs. And then the final game of the slate here, we've got the Commanders visiting the Cowboys. Certainly this is likely to be the late afternoon hammer. So, after my initial reads on all 10 games, I kind of went back and compared in my mind players, especially quarterbacks, to Jaden Daniels and Dak Prescott. This game carries a 55-point total. It's a full touchdown more than any other game on the Sunday main slate. And so while my thoughts are probably going to, develop as the week goes on, my first impression is that this is a game that will likely be accounted for on every roster that I build. So let's just start at the quarterback position, where Jaden Daniels probably the best on paper play at quarterback this week. If we look at opponents, Russell Wilson, Caleb Williams, Jordan Love all posted their best fantasy score of the season against Dallas. All 3 of them went for 29 or more points, while Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts both went for more than 24 points against Dallas. So, at sub 7K, if I'm likely to get 28 or more points, a 4X multiplier out of Jaden Daniels, got that built-in floor with his legs. He easily stands out as the best play in this game, in my opinion. On the other side of the ball, the matchup's strong for Dak Prescott, likely going to be getting his top weapon back in CeeDee Lamb. On the ground, the Commanders have surrendered massive games to Bijan Robinson, who went for 181 total yards. DeAndre Swift went for 175 total yards the past 3 weeks. So to me, Javonte Williams kind of stands out here in this matchup. I'm curious to see what the field does with him coming off, I think his worst performance of the season last week. On the other side of the ball, Dallas has also been a friendly matchup to opposing running backs, with Josh Jacobs, Breece Hall, and Rico Dowdle all going for more than 150 total yards the past 3 weeks. So, again, Bill, JCM, really stands out for me here on the Washington side of the ball as well. And then through the air, the Commanders have given up massive days. So 27 or more fantasy points to Tucker Kraft, Drake London, and Trey Tucker already. So, I think all those Dallas pass catchers are in play. And then the Dallas secondary honestly hasn't really been any more impressive, with Malik Neighbors, Romeo Doubs, Wan'Dale Robinson, all also topping 29 points against them. So I figure Lamb, Pickens, Ferguson all stand out for Dallas. I think Ertz, Debo, Terry McLaurin, if he plays, all stand out as pairing partners for Jaden Daniels. And I think, honestly, the slate comes down on Sunday to the last couple plays in this game. I expect this to be a high-scoring affair, and I expect it to be highly owned by the field. And then if we're talking defense, first pass through the defensive units that stood out to me, Kansas City, Denver, New England, Chicago, maybe Cleveland, maybe Carolina if you're kind of paying down. But that does it for me for our first look, y'all. Thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you and your OWS avatar atop a leaderboard this week. Catch you later.